Firstly, welcome everybody. Welcome, Natanya. And thank you for putting up your hand and offering to share your knowledge and your passion with the swimming industry. Just a quick introduction to Natanya for those that do not know her. She was a swimmer under Rocco at Tufts and did, sorry, I don't know the stats offhand, but participated at Commonwealth Games, a couple of world champs, so she can give us a rundown on that. But what really caught my attention is Natanya joined us on an ASCA Level 1 course. And then we got chatting about her passion for remedial teaching. So she currently is a remedial teacher and works closely with a range of specialists, providing the best option for her learners. She has a Bachelor's of Arts in Education and Psychology. I would love to know a little bit more why Sepedi as a language. I found that interesting. And then currently doing her special education needs and via correspondence through a university in East London. So definitely knows what she's talking about when it comes to this topic. Okay, then just from an admin point of view, we will load questions to this webinar so you can earn your CPD point. It will be 1 point issued by Swim South Africa. As I mentioned, the order number is not yet been issued, but as soon as I have it, it will be in Kettlebell. And then just in terms of the report that you print from Kettlebell, this is what it looks like, and Swim South Africa and your provinces do accept it. So it gives you a nice running total of all the education work you have done with Swim Coach, everything in one place. Okay, we have more coaches joining us. All right, so any admin questions, please, you can pop those directly to me. Otherwise, I'm going to now hand over to Natanya, and she's going to take it away for the rest of the session while we're here. Right, lovely. Over to you.
Hi, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday evening. I'm very, very excited to be here with all of you and to be able to have this discussion. I just quickly want to share my screen before I forget, because I do tend to run away with when I get excited about something. So there we go. If someone can just pop a thumbs up to let me know if they can see the presentation, just let me know. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So tonight's and I want to call it a discussion because it is a discussion. I think it's a really, really important topic for us to talk about, because it's not, I believe in the concept of lifelong learning, which is why I'm now busy with my master's. This is my 4th degree that I'm doing in special ed and special educational needs. So it's really something that I'm super, super passionate about. And I continue learning. I'm always reading, I'm always finding out. So which I feel like if it was just a one-way street, I probably would have stopped by now, because no one likes to just listen. You need to be able to ask questions, and you need to be able to get clarification on certain things. And it is a very, very complex topic, especially in additional learning needs. It's not a straightforward thing. If it was a straightforward thing, someone would have written a manual about it by now, and we would have all had the answers, and no one has. So it is a very complex thing. So please, if you have we are going to have a question and answer session at the end. But if you have a question as I'm talking about something and you're scared you forget or you need clarification, please just pop up your hand and unmute your mic and just say, Natanya, quickly, can I just ask something? And we can chat it through. I know Cheryl will monitor the chat as well. So if you don't want to unmute your mic and you rather want to pop a question in there, we can run through the questions there as well. So a little bit of background about me. So I did start swimming professionally at the age of 12, was my first international tour, senior international tour. I was a backstroker, 200 meters. I did youth Olympics, youth Commonwealth medalist. I did junior worlds, I did world champs, I did world student games, and I also did Commonwealth Games. So it really was my life professionally for about 9 years. I would call it retired, but I was very young when I did stop swimming. But I did it with the intention of following this path. And this is really, it truly is my passion. So if you see me talking a lot with my hands, or if my voice is getting really loud, it's because I really am super passionate about this. And I really think it's so important to have conversations like this. And I don't think, especially in our country, I don't think we are having enough conversations about this, and informed conversations. It can't just be, it's got to be based on research, you know. There are specific traits and characteristics and behaviors that are textbook. Some of them are not, but we need to know them. So this is going to be based on research. So it is going to be a lot that you take in tonight. So let me just go to the next slide. So tonight we're going to talk about the ideas behind the creation of the course, and which is what Cheryl and I have been talking about over the past couple of weeks, about how we want to run this next year. It's not going to be a one-stop shop, and tonight's not going to be like that either. There's just too much information to cover, and doing it in 1 hour or 2 hours, it's going to be an information overload, and a lot of the stuff you're not going to be able to retain, or you're going to forget about it. So we want to make it, we want to make it as informative as possible. So we're also going to talk about stigmas and statistics. I did my honors in inclusive education, so I'm very, very forward thinking in the sense of including everyone. So the stigmas is something that I think is very important, and our attitude towards additional learning needs and things that kids struggle with. And then I want to just touch on the definitions and behaviors of ADHD, ASD, which is your autism spectrum disorders, and Down syndrome. We did send out a little questionnaire, or like I think it was, a questionnaire. And a lot of people did say that they are quite familiar with the definitions and the behaviors of these disorders, but there are behaviors and characteristics of these disorders that aren't necessarily textbook, which I've come across in my research, but that I've also come across in practice. So I've worked with kids from the ages of 3 to 11, all with either ADHD, ASD, Down syndrome. I've also worked with kids that have oppositional defiant disorder. So I've seen a lot and I've worked with a lot. So, and that's from my experience of what I've seen happens, which we don't always necessarily get in a textbook. I also want to chat about sensory profiles. So all of these kids that we are dealing with are very sensory sensitive. So I want to talk about that and how it relates to the pool. I also want to talk about regulation, routine, and the instructions we give. So I'll give more detail of that as we go, and then there's a Q&A session, but just so that you kind of have an idea of how tonight's presentation is going to look. So first up, the idea behind the course. So the idea behind this is for me and for all of us to be able to connect with coaches. And I think it's really important to build a network, because that's also how you learn more about what's going on around you, where people have different things that happen in different squads, and to say, hey, listen, this is what happened with this child today, or I have this situation. How would you approach it? What would you do? Have you encountered something similar? So it's to be able for us to be able to connect as professionals, as coaches, as teachers, because I mean, in essence, coaching is teaching. And it's for us to be able to share and provide knowledge. So for you to share your knowledge with me, and for me to also share my knowledge with you, and to provide from my perspective the research that I've done, the research that I'm currently doing, just for you to have the most current information and research that is available on helping and dealing with these children. It's about gathering tools for your toolbox. So as coaches, we have a set of tools, but it doesn't help we have tools and we don't understand how the machine works. And with special needs kids, the machine is not always as straightforward. So I can give you the tools, but I also want to give you the understanding of how to apply them. It doesn't help I give you all of these things, but when you get to practice, you don't really know, and you don't know with what child, because not all of them are the same. And then just also practical ways of overcoming these challenges. Now, it's very meticulous and very time-consuming research to be able to come up with methods and ways, especially if we're now going to apply it to the swimming environment. Even in just the normal teaching environment, there's some information, but there isn't a lot of information of what to do with specific children or how to overcome challenges. And so to be able to apply that to a swimming environment, it's meticulous, it's time consuming, and it's also, from our perspective, we want to take our time to be able to provide you with useful stuff. It doesn't help I take 3 hours of your time next year and you could have gotten that information on Google, because that's not fair, but that's also not what I want to do. So we are taking the time, and our idea is to be able to do that in a 3-part course, or a 4-part course, maybe even more. And the focus will specifically be on Down syndrome, autism, and ADHD. So that's what we're looking at for next year. And this is kind of like an introduction to the type of things that we might cover going forward. So just some stigmas and statistics. So first up is language. And this was one of the first conversations that Cheryl and I had, where she said to me, I don't actually know what is the correct term. Like, how do we refer to these kids? And it's a very contested thing, and it's not something that there's a specific answer on. But the movement of inclusive education is kind of in the early 2000s, and it's really caught wind now. The language we use is extremely, extremely important. So the language I like to use is children with additional needs or children with barriers to learning, because it's something to overcome. It's not what and who they are. So I like to use the term, so you can call it special needs, additional learning needs, or barriers to learning. And I think it makes a huge difference. And I've seen it in my practice. Kids are extremely, they're like sponges. They take in everything that you say, especially when they're little. And sometimes you don't think they notice little things, like saying that you are autistic, or it's not that you have autism. People would say, but you are autistic. But that's not all they are. Okay, so that's my thing in saying that children are not their disorders. They have autism, or they have ADHD, or they have Down syndrome. It's something that they deal with, but it's not all that they are. And in acknowledging that in your own attitude and the way that you approach them, then it makes a huge difference in that child, and not even just their interactions with you, but their interactions with the rest of the world. The boost in self-confidence and self-esteem to be like, you know what, okay. And it's not always something that they understand. Remember, when kids are super little, like they'll know that, okay, I'm different, or I don't think the same way. But the minute that we tell them that that's what they are, we kind of close every single door for anything else that they could or would want to be. So I just like to take note of that. And I think it's really, really important. And also your attitude towards it. Remember, if you're in a squad environment, your other kids also noticing your interactions with those children, the way you speak of them, the way you speak about them. It's really, really important that you don't enforce that stigma or that stereotype, because it has an influence on how other people interact with those children then as well. And then something that I know is, as a teacher, I've had very, very intense situations. I've been bitten, I've had kids cut their hair off, they've cut my hair, but their reactions are not their fault. You have to understand that when you are dealing with kids who have additional needs, it's not their fault. And it is a very, very frustrating concept to understand sometimes, because it does work on your nerves. And I have all the empathy and sympathy for any coach and teacher who does it, because I know from experience how frustrating it can be. But if you have the patience and you take those deep breaths and maybe take a step outside or away from the pool and come back and try and figure out the reason behind the reaction, you deal with it so much better than just trying to tackle it head on. Because in my experience with these kids, an immediate reaction is never good, because my emotional reaction to their emotionality makes everything 10 times worse. And I know a lot of the times you want to tell them, it's enough now, or stop your crying, or stop this and get in the pool and swim, or do your work. It doesn't work. With these kids, it doesn't work. And there is a reason behind their reaction. So if we can take the time to understand those reactions, and then we use those tools in our toolbox to deal with those reactions, we build a better relationship with them. But you'll also find that if they realize that the environment that they're in is a safe space, that those reactions will happen less and less, because they know that where they are safe. And also, if we tailor the environment according to their needs, it does happen a lot less. But it is a lengthy process. And then the other thing is, training in isolation is not always the best option. And I know that this is not always possible, and we're going to talk about it more in depth. But a very, very important thing is that these kids really do struggle with...
I didn't catch that.
Sorry.
Could you try again?
Wants to get into the conversation today. So a very difficult thing with these kids is they really struggle to relate to the outside world. They struggle to find things in common, or kids find them annoying, or they don't understand. And the one thing that they have that they can relate to other people with is when they go swim. So if we put them in a squad environment, they have the means to connect with those around them, which is kind of the only way that they can connect. It's a common interest that they share with everyone else, which 9 times out of 10 in other situations they don't. So they live an extremely isolated life, and it might not always seem that way. So, but that's just something to keep in mind. But we are going to talk more about that later, because there are factors that do affect that, and it's not always possible. And I 100% agree, and I understand that. But it is just something that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation tonight, to just think about your training environment, think about your coaching environment, and maybe just think about it. And then the importance of this, in my mind, and why I really do think that it's important in the swimming world as well, is the statistics that are out there about drownings and kids not being water safe, especially kids with additional needs. And we can coach them, but if our coaching is not efficient, we're not teaching them the skills. So we could have them in our squads for I don't know how long, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those kids are fully equipped now and they are fine. So children with autism are 160 times more likely to drown. And 90% of drownings that happen to kids under the age of 9 are autistic kids. So it's really, really important that we take on these kids. And I know that it's a really daunting task sometimes to be like, yes, but I don't know, or these kids are super difficult, or I don't know how they're going to integrate into my squad. But you taking on one of those kids makes the statistic less. So yeah. And the other thing is that 50% of children with autism gravitate towards water. They have an extreme fascination with it. And this, which is something that we try as teachers to educate these parents to say, please take your kid for swimming lessons. And at the remedial school that I'm at, 90% of the parents don't. So we've got swimming lessons at the school that I do. And it's hectic, it's hard, and we can only do it during school hours, and we can only do it in term 1 and term 4 because the pool is not heated. So, But it is so important because the kids are absolutely fascinated with it. And I mean, I promise you, the first 3 or 4 lessons that I do with them, it's honestly just pure fascination with the water. And so you got to be super, super careful. And just, yeah, keep that in mind. If a parent comes to you and you don't know whether or not you should take it on, remember the statistic, and I hope that it pushes you to take the leap and to try and help them. So definitions and behaviors. So ADHD stands for attentional deficit and hyperactivity disorder. You also have ADD, which is the removal of the hyperactivity. So a lot of the understood or the more well-known behaviors is the impulsivity. So they just super quick to make decision, hyperactive, overexcited, all of those things, and low attention. So they don't pay attention very long. But what a lot of people don't know, and a lot of these things that you will see when you look at the behaviors on the screen at the moment and things like that, that a lot of them are the same. So with ADHD, autism, and with Down syndrome, a lot of the characteristics and the behaviors you'll find in all three. They'll present a little bit differently maybe, but a lot of them are very interlinked. And the reason for that is that a lot of these needs, and you can call them disorders because they are, just don't call the child a disorder or say that they have a disorder, maybe just say that they've got challenges or needs. But a lot of these things are comorbid, which means that they exist with other disorders. So with ADHD, you'll oftentimes find that kids have very high anxiety, with autism especially as well. Down syndrome, you've got thyroid problems, you've got heart problems. They also add very high risk for respiratory infections. So a lot of the symptoms or behaviors that you then see are not exactly tailored or not specifically ADHD, but it could be an interaction and because of something else that they are dealing with. So with ADHD, low muscle tone. And this is not just the big muscles. And for me, working in special needs education in the past 2.5, almost 3 years, it's been a major eye-opener too, because we've got kids that look super strong and then they go to occupational therapy and you get the scores back and they've got terrible muscle tone. And it's not just your big groups of muscles. A kid can be a good runner or they've got good legs, but we're talking about balance. We're talking about fine motor skills. It's not just the gross motor activity. So a lot of these kids have low muscle tone that you wouldn't initially notice straight off the bat. They have a lot of issues with emotional regulation. So it's not just that they can't control their own emotions. They oftentimes don't understand them. And especially with the little kids, it's very difficult because they'll be emotional, upset about something, or angry. And that's where we've got to read the situation, and we have to understand that the reaction is not their fault. And they might not be able to tell you why they are reacting that way, which is why we then have to try and figure out, okay, based on the situation, based on where they are coming from. Remember, a lot of the times, if you're not teaching or coaching learn to swim when the kids are coming from nursery school and it's after school, you're getting that child after an entire school day. So, and even if they are on medication, which is a very, very big debate at this point in time, their meds have worn off. And it is unrealistic to expect a child to have more concentration medication at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where we've got long acting, which Ritalin is normally your LA. It's a long acting thing, which means that that's going to stay in that child's system for at least 8 hours. So if we're expecting parents to give their child another Ritalin before they come to swimming training, you have to understand that that child is going to be awake until 10 o'clock. And then you've got teachers the next morning that are saying that the kid's not functioning in the school environment because they didn't get a proper night's sleep the previous night before. So it is a very, very difficult thing. But something that people don't know about ADHD is the ability for these children to hyperfocus. And so I don't know if it's a very well-known fact, but Michael Phelps has ADHD. And he is very open about mental health awareness and things like that. But a part of his success, he attributes to the fact that he could hyper focus for hours on end just on swimming. And it's not necessarily to say that all ADHD kids, if they can hyper focus, will hyper focus on swimming. They might hyper focus on something else. But you will find that if you do have an ADHD child and swimming is their passion and it is something that they're really interested in, they are extremely, extremely hard workers under the right conditions. So to also not always just see it from a negative aspect that, oh, I've got this kid with ADHD. It isn't always a negative thing. They are extremely disorganized though. They might have one paddle, they won't have a pool buoy. Oh, I've forgotten my cap at home. I don't have a towel today. I forgot my, it is a trait. It is a characteristic. It is a behavior, and it's in every aspect of their lives. They are also extremely sensory sensitive, which we are going to touch on, because as you'll see with autism and Down syndrome as well, all of them, all of the disorders have the characteristic of kids being sensory sensitive. They also struggle to switch between activities. So you'll find that if you go in between warm up to main set, or in learn to swim, if you're going from one activity to the next activity, you're blowing bubbles and then you want them to kick with the board, it's going to take them a super long time to go from this to this, because that changing focus and then, oh, there's something new that I get to see now. It takes them a long time. With autism spectrum disorder, it's a spectrum, and what a lot of people, there's another disorder that's been brought under the band of ASD, which is Asperger's. So Asperger's used to be a diagnosis completely on its own. Asperger's is just a high functioning autism. So what I mean with you have high functioning and low functioning, if you are high functioning autistic, you still struggle with social interaction, reading, communication, and social skills. You have repetitive behaviors, and they oftentimes focus on one thing, and that's all they're interested in. And I had a child in my classroom that is just focused on boats. So if it's not about a boat, he's not interested. And so if we do an activity, it could be maths, but we'd have to count boats. If we count anything else, it's not happening. If we're in life skills and he has to draw a picture of his family, he drew a picture of his family on the boat. So they have repetitive behaviors and interests, and they're only concerned with that. So something that you can keep in the back of your mind with that is, if you know that there is a specific theme that's going, organize your learn to swim or your coaching around that. You know, we are going to float on a boat today or something, just to keep them interested. Because something that you also need to understand about autistic children, they are not interested in your emotions because they can't understand them. They have an extremely low EQ. So your high functioning, high IQ, low EQ. So emotional intelligence, they don't have it, whether they are high functioning or low functioning. Either side of the spectrum, they don't understand emotions. So they're not interested in your emotions, and they're also not really interested in sharing about their own emotions. And it's something that people need to not take offense about. So if you get in the pool and you say, hi, how are you today? I'm fine. That's all you're going to get, if even that. And that's just how it is. And it's nothing, it's just how it is. But so your low IQ, your low EQ, you also then have your nonverbal autistic children. Your nonverbal children tend to be on the lower end of the spectrum, lower IQ, lower EQ, and which is why their speech delay is as much as it is, because those communication skills are not there. Extremely sensory sensitive, which can go both ways with both ADHD and autism. We've got our seekers and our avoiders, which we're going to talk about. They're also extremely disorganized, and they are extremely literal, which is something I'm going to touch on later about the way we give instructions and the way that we organize our activities in the pool. You have to keep in mind how literal these children are, even from when they're super, super small. They take everything extremely literally, which is why in frustrating situations, when you are frustrated with a child, sarcasm just can't be a thing, because it's not going to work with them. You'll literally get an answer. And one thing that always sticks with me, that's like a very quick reminder, is I had a little kid. He was in grade 0, and there was a fly sitting on his desk when he was eating, and he said to me, "There is a fly next to my food." And I said to him, "Tell the fly to shoo away." And he went down and he went, "Shoo." And the fly didn't do anything. And that's when I realized, I was like, okay, he doesn't understand that shoo means tell the fly to go away, wave it away. It was literally tell the fly to shoo, and it didn't work. And then their emotional regulation is really difficult, especially with their communication and the fact that they have a low EQ. They don't understand their own emotions, and they don't understand yours. So which is why emotional situations can become extremely overwhelming for them, which is why that emotional regulation is so important. They also struggle to switch between activities. With your Down syndrome kids, they are extremely easily overwhelmed especially with new tasks. So they'll be very, very reluctant to try something new. They love habit, routine. It's a big thing. They like, and it's the same thing with ASD, where they like to do the same thing every single day, because there's no unknown. They know exactly what's going to happen, and that's what they like to do. So, which is something that is not always possible, but there are ways that you can counteract that rigidness and that fear of change, which I will chat about in a second. And they thrive on social interaction. So they also have the low muscle tone, being sensory sensitive, but they thrive on social interaction, which is what I spoke about in the previous slide when I said that these kids, a lot of people would say that maybe it's good to have them train on their own because they are so demanding, but they thrive on being part of a group. So the most success that in research and recorded research on Down syndrome, children who have Down syndrome and swimming, is swimming in groups, because this is where they can relate to those around them. So, which is something to keep in mind. I know it depends on the severity and the child on the day, but to give them that opportunity. And a lot of the times, and something that's been, sorry, if the person that just joined could please just mute. So something that's been extremely eye-opening for me in working with children who have special needs, and especially children who have physical challenges or physical disabilities, as some people call it, is that's all they know. And that's part of what they've had to deal with their entire life. And they don't need the assistance that we always think that they need. But in working in a school where kids have cerebral palsy and are in wheelchairs and things like that, to see their interaction with other children it's honestly mind-blowing. So a lot of the times, people I know, the whole debate on inclusive education, or how do you include children who have additional needs into normal classrooms or into your swim squad, because how are they going to interact with the other children, and bullying and all of that. But if you do it in a controlled environment, the impact that you see on your other children in how their empathy and their social and emotional skills develop in helping these children and growing alongside them. I mean, it's honestly, for me, it's an incredible thing to watch. And I see it, I do see it every day. And it is amazing to see, if it's done the right way and it's done in a controlled way, how beautiful the interactions can be between those children, and how those children, and how much those kids benefit from that interaction, not just the children who have Down syndrome, but also your other kids. So that's something that I think is super important. So your sensory profile, so I spoke about this a little bit earlier, I touched on it. So all of your kids who do struggle with ADHD or with ASD or Down syndrome, are sensory sensitive. So we do, and in education, it's a big thing where we do what we call a sensory profile. So you can either have sensory seeking children or you can have sensory avoidant children. So if they're sensory seeking, they want sensory input. So it's either tactile or it's auditory or it's visual, but they are constantly seeking that input. And something that I've noticed in my interactions with kids in the pool is they are driven by motor. They're constantly going, and it's not just in the pool, but they are like from this onto the next, onto the next. They just want to go. They also love splashing, the input that they get, the sensory input that they get from their hands, but also the noise of the splashing and the water on their face. They also love drinking the water and swimming with an open mouth. I actually, in that unfortunate instance, I had a child that was so sensory seeking, and we were kicking, and he had just gobbled so much water, and I had picked him up and he had vomited all over me. And then the rest of the kids couldn't understand why we couldn't carry on swimming for the rest of the day. So they are extremely sensory seeking, and it's not necessarily something that changes as they get older. The behavior just changes. So the swimming with an open mouth, the drinking water, the splashing, I don't think ever changes, but those things do change a little bit. Then your sensory avoidant kids, which you do sometimes see more prominently with your ASD children, your autism children, that they do not respond well to noise. They are very, very auditory sensitive. And they do not respond well to splashing because of the sound it makes, but also that they do not like the water on their bodies. So if they are tactile sensitive, which means they're very sensitive, they're sensitive to touch, they're not going to necessarily initially like the feeling of water on their skin. So the whole thing about children with ASD gravitating towards water, they might still be very fascinated with it, but they don't necessarily want to get in it or feel it on their bodies. And they avoid physical touch, which is once again sensory sensitive. They avoid physical touch at all times, which does make it quite difficult, I know, especially in the learn to swim environment where they don't want you touching them. So it is a challenge, which is why the next slide, I think, is an extremely important thing that I would love to see being implemented in swimming environments, especially for coaches who are working with kids who have additional needs. So we do something, we call it a sensory profile. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a bit of a screenshot of a part of it. And this is what we give to parents at the beginning of the year to fill in, because also your relationship with your parents, I cannot stress it enough how important your relationship with your parents are when you're working with children who have additional needs. And what parents sometimes don't realize, because they deal with those kids every day, they've known them since birth. So their behaviors, their traits are second nature to the parents. So sometimes they forget about certain things. They'll forget that they don't like certain things. And then it's really important for you as a coach or a teacher to know that. So we do what we call a sensory profile, which is a document that parents fill in at the beginning of the year. And we like to revise it once a year or once every 6 months, because if you see a change in that child before the year, you can give them a sensory profile again, or you could have an informal discussion with them. But your sensory profile, in essence, covers your visual processing, auditory processing, touch, movement, attentional behaviors, oral sensory processing, your body position, and social and emotional behaviors. So from this, you get a raw score or a rating scale, which we then use to say that on a scale of, or I'm just going to use the one we use on a scale from 1 to 5, the kid's visual processing, his sensitivity is a 4, which means he's extremely sensitive to visual input. So this just kind of gives you an indication of what the child can deal with and what they are comfortable with and what's going to be a challenge for them. And as much as you can't change the environment entirely. There are tiny things that you can do to adapt your swimming environment to the auditory processing or the touch or the movement. the visual is a big thing, bright lights, lots of posters that are distracting, things like that. So this is something that, and it's freely available. You can, or it's freely available, or you can purchase set sensory profiles that give you the tables and the scores and everything, or you can download one and from that develop your own, which is something that I think is really, really important, because it just gives me that background information of the reaction. So if something happens in the pool and the child has a freak out just after we've done a kicking activity, it could have either been the splashing or the noise, or it could have been something else. Someone might have touched him. You never know, but that is something that I could then just be like, okay, off the top of my head, there's 1 of 3 reasons why he could have reacted, or she could have reacted the way that she reacted. So yeah, it is a very not a complicated, it's a lengthy thing, and it's a lot of admin, but it does give you the knowledge, and it does make it a little bit easier for you when trying to understand the child and to relate to them. And also just the way you then question them, because they don't necessarily understand why they are feeling the way they are feeling. Sorry, I see Siri wants to just say something again. So it gives you a guiding question. So with them not being able to regulate their own emotions, I had a kid today, it was our last day of school, and I had handed out his report to him, and he just burst out crying. And I said to him, "What's wrong? Are you fine?" He said, "No, he's just so tired. He didn't sleep well last night." And this was a child who had to repeat grade 3 after having gone to grade 4 in a previous school, and having to be put back in grade 3 the minute he got his report. He was so fearful of the fact that he would see that he's going to have to repeat grade 3 again, because this is what's happened previously. But it's a subconscious thing for him. So when he opened his report, he said, I just need to see something. And when I said to him, does it make you sad, or does it make you scared that this is something that might happen? He said, no, he doesn't really know. So, but then we could work through the situation, and a couple of minutes later, he was fine. But then having that background knowledge of this is something that has happened, that is what triggered his reaction, and we could then work through it. It's not always that easy, but it does happen. Then in terms of regulation, routine, and instructions, so the 3 things that are quite often reasons why children have adverse emotional reactions are because they are overexcited, they are overstimulated, or they are just exhausted. And which is why I said earlier, we get kids after they've been at an entire day of school. So the stimulation is a lot. It's visual, it's auditory, it's everything. And sometimes it is chaos. So when they get to you, they are so overstimulated that they cannot process any more sensory information. So they genuinely cannot process it. So then that emotional regulation becomes impossible at that point, which is oftentimes where we have the adverse emotional reactions. So a major thing there's a lot of research on it, and a lot of current research and still research being done, is DBT, which is your deep pressure technique, which is known to prove, well, it's been proven that it decreases and helps kids with their emotional regulation. So it brings down your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormones, and deep pressure increases your dopamine, your happy hormone, and it decreases your anxiety. So deep pressure, it's in the name, it's deep pressure. So what normally is done, if kids are not sensitive to touch, is you could make a cross with your arms like this and put it over that. You come up behind them, so you'd make the cross over their little bodies, and you'd literally just press down, and slowly but surely they will slow their breathing, and they'll stop crying if they are crying, and they would calm down that sense of deep pressure. So but what schools do, especially with ASD children who are sensitive to touch, they've got weighted blankets, which they then put over them for 5 minutes, and that pressure on their shoulders calms them down. But the research has been super interesting for me, which is something that I've implemented in my classroom and which is something that can be implemented in swimming, is jumping. So the deep pressure at the bottom of children's feet gives it's the same sensory input as they would get if you were pressing down on their shoulders. So in my classroom, I've got a little trampoline, and if a child is struggling to regulate, they go and get to jump on the trampoline for 5 minutes, because who doesn't love jumping on the trampoline? So it's not, and it calms them down and it makes them happy and it helps them regulate. But something that is great in the pool is literally just jumping up and down from the bottom to the top, because when you are submerged, either fully submerged, but some of them don't like getting their faces wet, or submerged up to your neck, the water provides the deep pressure that you would also get from the hug or from the weighted blanket. So something that could be implemented if in the middle of a session you see a child is struggling to regulate, or at the beginning of a session, let them jump up and down, or let them just be submerged in the water for a couple of minutes, and they will hopefully calm down. It doesn't always work. None of these are quick fix or 100% effective, but it is something that you could try. And then routine. So like I said earlier, these kids thrive on routine. They thrive on things being exactly the same every single day. And like I said earlier, they have a big fear of the unknown. So when kids are doing something, they'll probably always want to know, what are we doing next? Or what are we doing after this? And maybe sometimes it would work with kids saying, I'm not going to tell you now, or you'll see later, or it's none of your business, or, you'll see when you get there. With some kids it works, they can shut it off and just carry on with what they're doing. But with your kids who have additional needs, you'll find they always ask why. And if you don't sufficiently answer them in saying why something is happening, they won't stop asking why, but they also won't be able to focus on what they are currently doing, because that need has not been satisfied. So if you have a child that is constantly asking why during a training session, or why are we doing this, give them the knowledge. Tell them that, if someone's asking, why are we doing a kicking set? Why do I have to kick with the board? Give them the reason to say, we need to work on the strength of your legs, but give them knowledge. Don't just say because I say so, because it does not satisfy that need, and they won't be able to move on or carry on until that has been satisfied. They struggle to switch between activities, especially if they enjoy it. It's going to be something that you need to give them a fair warning. And so the picture that you'll see on the left over here is an example of a visual timetable. So a visual timetable is something that I have in my classroom for certain kids who need to know what is going to happen. So it's not necessarily that the timetable is the same every single day, but if on a day it's going to be different, I will change the timetable and give them a new visual representation so they can see exactly what they are going to do. And if I can see that we might have a bit of a hiccup before we move to the next activity, I give them a 5-minute warning, and I will say, in 5 minutes, we have to move from what we are doing now to the next thing. Because if you just bring it on them and say, we are moving now, or we're doing the next thing now, they'll tell you no. They'll switch off and say, I'm not doing this now. So giving them that fair warning is really, really important. And giving them a sense of routine or a sense of structure that they can know, okay, when I come to the pool, this is where I sit. And then we can either do this on this day, or we can do that on that day. And if there's going to be a change, give them a fair warning. And then always have a backup, because they might just tell you no, which does happen. But to then have that backup activity, which is also something that you can keep in mind for children who have specific interests that they fixate on, is to have a backup activity that is linked to that interest. So if I have kids in my classroom, and I do have a girl that really, really struggles to switch between activities, and sometimes she just refuses, but she loves coloring in kittens. That's something that is just, she just loves it so much. So I will have a backup activity to say, okay, then you can color. What about if we do this? Because then at least it removes the disruption that it creates for the rest of the children. Because a lot of the times people would say incorporating children who have additional needs, it's really difficult because they are super disruptive, or I'm spending all this time on this child and I never get to spend time on the other children. Have that backup activity, because if one day it's just going south and none of the strategies are working, have a backup that that child can still carry on with, because they still have the right to learn and to participate if they want to participate. But the other kids still need the attention. So that's what we try and do in teaching, and what I've tried to do with the kids when I swim with them. And then instructions. This is a very difficult one and something that I practice on a daily basis, but multi-step instructions don't work. You are going to lose them halfway. They will remember the first step of the instruction. They won't remember the rest, which is why in your coaching and even in your teaching, in your instructions to children, keep it simple. Keep it one thing at a time. And that's why it oftentimes takes kids with additional needs, it takes them longer, because they can only focus on one thing at a time. They can't do a drill where they're focusing on kicking and arms, because then you'll find they're just focusing on the kicking or just the arms, because that's all they could remember. Also, if you've got sets where they have to do a 50 kick, then a 50 pull, then it's really confusing for them, because they're going to remember the first thing and then they're going to be like, oh, coach, what are we supposed to do now? Or, so multi-step instructions, it's for all of them, it is, it does not work. And then especially with autistic kids, or kids who have autism, your figurative language, they don't understand it. They are extremely literal. So I was actually on a course this weekend with Learn to Swim instructors, and we had the discussion about walking like a crab. So where they do the crab walk, some people call it the choo-choo train, on the side of the wall for the kids to warm up. And if you had to tell a child with autism, walk like a crab, their response will be, but I'm not a crab. So they won't be able to understand what that means. So you have to be very, very specific in your instructions while keeping them very simple. It's an extremely difficult task, because for a person who's neurotypical, it just comes naturally. But for them, it doesn't. So oftentimes it's very difficult, because you got to put yourself in their shoes and know, okay, if I think this way, how would I understand? And that's why keeping it as simple as possible is the best way to go. It's the best way to get feedback from them. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that for tonight. I do see I have gone on for a lot longer than I thought I would. But like I said, there is a lot of information with this. And I mean, I really am being very honest when I say I've barely scratched the surface. So there is a lot more to know. And if I've spoken very quickly tonight, I'm very sorry if you've lost me along the way, but I do know that the recording is going to be made available. So if you want to watch it again, Cheryl, I don't know if my email address is anywhere, but if anyone has any questions that come up after tonight, please feel free to pop me an email. But yeah, if there are any questions now, I'd love to hear from you guys if there is anything that anyone wants to ask. I see someone did ask which school I'm teaching at. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see it? Yeah. What school are you teaching at?
I'm teaching at Pretoria Preparatory School, so it's a remedial school. So the kids at our school follow the normal CAPS curriculum. So they are high functioning ASD, ADHD. They aren't any Down syndrome children in our school currently. But at the previous school that I worked at, with some of the kids that I do extra remedial work, do have Down syndrome. Yeah.
Right, lovely, thank you. That was really informative. And yes, you did go at a rapid pace, but it was easy enough to follow. So yes, I do think the recording will be well received by others to just be able to go through the information. But coaches, what I think is more exciting is we're going to, in the new year, break down each special needs and go into a lot more detail on how to deal with them. Danielle, yes, the email will be provided. I will drop it on to onto the email with the recording. So I have your email addresses from the Zoom registration link, and you will also need to log into Kettlebell with your email address. So all of the communication will be on email from myself. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. So we do have one more very informative. Thank you. There is so much to learn and take into consideration. Thanks. So Brenda, yes, we agree there is so much to learn in this. So that's why next year we're really going to go into a lot of detail in helping coaches and teachers deal with each topic separately. All right, Natanya, thank you very much. Thank you, coaches, for giving us your time. Remember to log into Kettlebell from tomorrow to earn your CPD point. And we will then communicate early next year all the other programs that we're going to put together.
Awesome.
Right. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Cheers. Cool.